Hello, my name's Taquan Clerkley, and today is April 10th, 2019. I'm at Grandview Middle School in Hickory, North Carolina, interviewing Mr. Cary Bowman. His family experiences, his military experiences in Gulf War, Operation Iraq Freedom, and Operation Enduring Freedom. Thank you for joining us today. Before we go any farther, could you please spell your full name?
Full name spelled Cary, C-A-R-Y. Last name is Bowman, B-O-W-M-A-N.
Thank you. Would you tell me a little bit about your childhood, family, and where you grew up?
Sure. I was raised just right across the river in Alexander County in Bethlehem, and grew up there all of my childhood years. Went to Bethlehem Elementary School, West Middle School, and Alexander Central. I have an older brother. I had two parents who were great, normal middle-class family, a lot of good friends, and just good experience as a child, and good environment to grow up in.
Did your family accept your decision?
Yes, very much so. My mother was a little hesitant at first, but she knew it would be a good thing for me and help me to get some discipline and learn more about the world.
Did you have any family members in the military?
I had two uncles. One served in the Korean War, one served in Vietnam. I have a first cousin who is also in the Army and is currently in the Army Reserves here in Hickory.
Did they affect your decision?
No, not really. I didn't have a lot of influence from the uncles. Of course, I went in before my cousin did. So not as much their military experience, but just their values and their integrity, along with the rest of my family members.
What do you remember about 9/11, and where were you, and how did you react?
I was home. I had a used to have a house just right over in Caldwell County, and I was scheduled to go down to Charlotte that day for a job fair. I had just finished my master's degree at Lenore-Ryan University, and I was looking for my next opportunity. So I got a phone call from a friend, asked if I had seen on the news, and I had not turned on my TV that morning. So I turned it on, saw what was happening, realized that this was going to change us forever. Still went to Charlotte that day, but it was really different because there were no planes flying over. Where I was going for the job fair was right by the airport, and it was very unusual to be in that area of Charlotte and not seeing any planes flying at that time.
What inspired you to join the service, and why did you choose the Army?
Good question. I did very well in high school. I was accepted to 3 universities, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to pursue in college. But I did have a desire to serve and help give back to our country. The Army looked like a good move for me. They had the type of jobs that I was interested in. I was excited about the opportunity of maybe being a paratrooper. And at that time they had a really good educational benefits too, which all services have now. But at that time it seemed like the Army had a really good one.
Okay. What is the highest rank you held in the service?
I am retired Lieutenant Colonel.
And how did it affect you?
Lieutenant Colonel? It was a pleasant surprise that I was able to make it this far. I started out as a private and worked my way up. A lot of responsibility comes with the rank. All ranks have their place and certain responsibilities, but the higher rank you go, the more you have of that. I've been in charge of millions and millions dollars worth of equipment, number of people, over in the hundreds of people that you are personally responsible for. So it takes a lot of care and a lot of concern for whenever you're in charge of people and you may have to make decisions that could possibly affect their lives.
How do you recall the day you left the service, and what do you remember?
Well, the last day that I was actually in the service, it was my retirement ceremony, and it was I was in right outside Washington, D.C. in Arlington, Virginia. That was my last assignment, and I had family and friends and colleagues that were there. It was bittersweet because I knew I was turning a chapter in my life. No more getting up every morning, putting on my boots and going to work. But I was excited about what might happen next in the next chapter, and we eventually wanted to move back to Hickory, which we did finally. But it was, like I said, bittersweet. I enjoyed the ceremony. It was great, but kind of miss working with the people.
Would you tell me about your experience in basic training, officer commanded school, and sweating off your stripes?
Basic training, I was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I was just right out of high school, 18 years old. First time I'd actually been away from home for an extended period of time. So that was a new adventure there, but I made friends quickly, and the training itself, a little bit different when you've got, men, maybe women yelling at you because you're not doing something right. But knowing that was all part of the training and what to expect, it wasn't so bad. After that, I had my advanced individual training. Then I went to jump school at Fort Benning, Georgia. That was an experience of jumping out of an airplane. Very exciting. And if you ever get the chance, you ought to do it. Ulster, Kansas School was later on. That was probably the toughest training of all of them together. We started off with over 100 candidates to be commissioned from enlisted to an officer, and we only graduated with 33. So whatever that percentage is, but from over 100 to 33 only. It's very tough. Talking about sweating out your stripes. It was a tradition that we had when most enlisted at that stage, you're a non-commissioned officer, a sergeant or a staff sergeant. So you've got stripes on your sleeves. To lose those stripes, and now you're going to be an officer, you're getting a gold bar. So the tradition was that we would put on ponchos in the middle of August at Fort Bragg, where it's very hot anyway, and we'd put on these ponchos and we'd run around the barracks and run around the compound over and over again and just sweat like crazy. And then some of the people that smoked, they were smoking cigars. I don't smoke, so I don't recommend that. But it was funny, and it's one of those traditions. I don't know if they still do that or not, though.
Were you involved in any international conference prior to the Gulf War?
I did some. I spent a year in Korea. It was not a conflict. It was just a tour of duty. And then I also spent two trips to Germany for training, all prior to 9/11.
Did it prepare you for what you were going to face in the first Gulf War?
No, not really. I mean, going to a foreign land is, I'll take that back. It does help you, because once you go over to a foreign land and you see how the culture is different, the people are different, and you've got to overcome the language barrier. If they don't speak English, you've got to adapt and learn how to communicate with them. I learned a little bit of Korean, or Hangul, it's actually called, when I was over there, but being exposed and having that experience with different cultures, it does sort of get you prepared for going into maybe a hostile environment.
Where did you and what were you doing during the first war, Gulf War?
time that I went over there was 2003. That was the initial invasion into Iraq when the coalition forces went in to liberate Kuwait. Well, I'm sorry, Kuwait was 91. When we staged in Kuwait. So I was in Kuwait helping with all the bases there in Kuwait, which was a receiving station and also a departing station for all coalition forces. We worked with the British, the Germans, the French. Did I say English? I think I did. Anyway, all of the coalition forces were all at the same basis. So that was my experience, my first tour for Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Did it prepare you for what you faced in Desert Shield and Desert Storm?
I did not deploy for Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I was actually going to Officer Candidate School when that took place in 1990, 91.
What can you tell me about becoming a real paratrooper in the Airborne Club?
The paratrooper and what? Airborne?
Airborne Club.
Oh, the Airborne Club. And again, I don't know if it's still this way today. Things have changed since I was there. But back then, when you finished up your airborne school, jump school at Fort Benning, and you were stationed at Fort Bragg, especially with the 82nd Airborne Division, you first were, they took you in, but you weren't really part of the team yet. You haven't earned your respect. They haven't seen what you can do, so they don't know if you just barely got through jump school or you really know what you're doing or whatever. So the old tradition was after so many jumps, you have basically earned the right to be called a paratrooper. So I believe it was 11 jumps is the number of letters it is to spell paratrooper. So once you hit that mark, we would finish up. I remember when it happened to me, and we finished the jump. We're on the drop zone, and we all turned in our equipment, and we're all in formation, getting ready to get on the trucks to go back. And they called me up, and everyone said, at the time I was a private, Private Bowman has reached paratrooper status or something like that, and they all congratulated me. And it's basically, all right, now you're one of us. You're in the brotherhood.
Could you please tell me about the comedic traditions in the grog board at the unit dinners?
Yes. At what we have, there's the dining in and there's the dining out. Dining ins are usually just unit members, just the soldiers themselves. The dining out, you bring your spouse, and you get all dressed up in your dress mess. Actually went to one just a couple of weeks ago in Raleigh. But the dining in is where it gets just have a lot of fun with that. You have what they call a Mr. Vice, who sort of is the MC. He runs the dining in. And you have to, if you want to address the mess, they call it, you have to ask for permission. And if you do anything that's outside of the rules, then you may be charged or fined, they say, to go to the grog bowl. And the grog bowl would be a big, like a punch bowl full of all kinds of stuff, mostly alcohol, beverages. But sometimes they would put things in there just that would be a representative of something like, say, I remember seeing a wool sock put in. It was for the infantry who are on their feet, and we salute the infantry that are always marching, and here's a sock. And they'd put it in the grog bowl with the rest of the liquid. So. And then sometimes you take a boot and you dip it into the grog bowl and you drink out of the boot if you did something wrong.
Prior to leaving Kuwait in 2003, what did you hear about the wars from your fellow service members?
We all were very proud of what we had done over there, but we knew we were leaving and the real work was just getting started. We were over there whenever they completely removed Saddam Hussein from power, but Iraq at that time was still in a vacuum. They didn't have a working government. And we knew that there was a lot of work for the Iraqis, and with the help of the U.S., we were hoping that they would someday be, independent and sustainable themselves. So we knew we had done a good job, but we knew there was a whole lot more to be done.
Could you talk about your experiences with the suspicious SUV on your 2003 deployment?
We were leaving Camp Doha, which is where I was based at, and we were on our way to Camp Arif John, which is still in use now over in Kuwait. We were traveling in just a regular SUV like we would see out here on the street, no armored up, no bulletproof glass and anything like that. There had been some what the Iraqis were using called Scud missiles, and they would fire into Kuwait sometimes just trying to get lucky and hit something. At one time they actually hit in Kuwait City a shopping mall. So we knew that there were possibly, bad guys in Kuwait, and they were probably out there looking to see if they could take advantage of some U.S. or either coalition forces that were out. So we were driving down the road. We saw another SUV come up next to us. They looked pretty suspicious. Men, they wear headgear or scarves and things like that all the time, but something about these, they looked a little bit more suspicious. So we weren't sure what we were going up against, if anything at all. So we took the time, we went ahead and what we call locked and loaded. So we had our weapons, but we usually don't chamber around. You just don't do that unless you're really ready to maybe engage. So we decided that we needed to go ahead and be prepared just in case. So we went and chambered around. Luckily, nothing happened. We slowed down, let that SUV go by us, and we didn't see him anymore. So it's probably a false alarm, but it was enough to get you a little stressed out there, not knowing for sure.
Do you think mentally and physically prepared for your deployment in the middle of the East?
Yes, we were prepared. No one is prepared for the kind of heat that the Middle East has. We were just talking about that a while ago. It gets very hot over there. Kuwait and Iraq and other parts of the Middle East can get very hot. And we think North Carolina gets hot, which it does, but we have the high humidity, and that makes it kind of very uncomfortable. Over there, the heat is just a lot more. Imagine opening up the oven when your mom's baking cookies or something, and that heat hits you in the face. Well, that's the kind of heat that it feels like all the time over there. But other than the heat, yes, we were prepared physically for everything. You had to get used to wearing the body armor, though, which weighs quite a bit. And every time you went outside of the compound, you had to be armored up, we called it.
What type of culture shock did you experience in Iraq and Kuwait, and did it change any of your culture viewings?
Big difference of how the people live, what they're willing and able to, to deal with. For example, we take for advantage electricity. We have it 24/7 every day. If the power goes out for a few minutes or an hour, we're all in panic mode. Over in Iraq, outside Baghdad, they had power like 4 hours a day. That was it. And I don't know if it was the government or whoever was running the power, they would turn on the power for so many hours, then they'd turn it off. Now, it wasn't because they were trying to be mean or anything, they just didn't have the capability to run it all the time. So that's one of those things that we take advantage of. And another thing is their living conditions. We all probably have a nice house, head over a roof over our head, and food to eat. And sometimes we saw people over there that didn't have either. We gave them food, we gave them clothing. The way they live in some of those areas, it was almost like a trash dump, and that's where they lived. Now, could they do better? I think so. Instead of walking around and complaining, why don't somebody get out there and pick up the trash? I don't know. It's a different culture. that's how they lived, and I don't know if that bothered them or not.
What was the primary duties and responsibilities during your deployment in 2003?
2003, I was assigned to the headquarters of what was called Area Support Group Kuwait. And like I said, we oversaw all of the base camps within Kuwait. So major units would come in to Kuwait on their way to Iraq. They would arrive in Kuwait, go to the base camp, and that's where they would train, get acclimated, wait for the rest of their equipment to show up, and then from there they would convoy up into Iraq. We also would deal with the units when they were leaving. So they would come from Iraq, come back to Kuwait, get their equipment prepared to send back home. So we had to run all of those base camps. We had to make sure food, water, ice was a big thing, fuel, all the tents or the lodging that they stayed in. I was working there and overseeing all the logistics of all of that stuff. Like I said, the water, we were talking, millions, thousands of cases of bottled water, because it's not like you're going to, just get water at these base camps that they put out in the middle of nowhere. It's not like you got a water line running into the base camps. So I was tracking and reporting on the logistical side of all that.
What was your primary duties and responsibilities during your deployment in 2009?
2009, I was at Forward Operating Base Falcon, which was just south of Baghdad. I was working with the Civil Military's operations team. Our job was to work with local businesses, local government, and to help them to expand, to get the government working, to help them any way that we could, to see how things work on a democratic process. They weren't used to that. They were used to being ran by a dictator. Also, we worked with farmers. We worked with business owners. I liked the part where we were helping them with growing chickens. Being part of the National Guard was kind of unique, because with the National Guard, you have certain soldiers that other skills that they can bring from their civilian job. National Guard, you're a civilian, and you have your civilian job, but you also are a soldier. For example, we had one guy who worked for Tyson's. I believe it was, Tyson's chicken. So he knew a lot about how to raise chickens and process chickens and all that. Well, we put him with our teams out there, and they were able to help the Iraqis to also, all the way from the hatching of the eggs to the growing of the chickens to the processing so it could be sold in the markets. So it was a good, very rewarding job then.
What does democracy mean to the Iraqis?
I think they're still trying to figure out that they have a say in what goes on in their country. We saw a lot of elections go on while we were over there in 2009. The candidates they usually will come from one religious side more than, say, a political side like we have here in the U.S. You've got left and the right and the middle on here of our political spectrum, but over there a lot of it has to do with their religious background too. So hopefully they have come a long way. I don't hear too much in the news right now about Iraq, so I'm hoping that that's a good sign that they've made a lot of progress in their political system.
What would you be willing to talk about your combat experience in Iraq during 2009 deployment?
We had a lot of times when they were called insurgencies. Basically, it was the Iraqis that were not happy that things had turned out the way that they had. Either they wanted to go back to the old ways when Saddam Hussein was in charge, or they didn't like the current government, and they didn't like the U.S. presence. So we would be mortar fired sometimes within our compound. There were more than one time that I was laying in bed at night and the ground shook so hard it about knocked me out of my bed because a mortar went off so close. Luckily, no casualties took place within our compound, but it could have. I mean, very easily, because they just launched these mortars and just hoped that they hit something. And some other bases they did hit, but not our base. Another experience I had, we were going down the road in our MRAP, and on the way back, and our vehicle took fire, small arms fire, and I didn't even hear it. So I don't know if it just went, bounced off or outside, but we have sensors on there that detect incoming rounds, and it went off. Now you hear that and you know what the sound is. That will make you take notice because you don't know what it is that's coming in. When you hear the little siren goes off, and we were wearing our headphones so we could hear, everything on the intercom. So we took a little bit of, fire for that. That's the combat action badge I got for that because I was involved in what they considered that a combat action, even though I never saw the enemy. I didn't return fire, but we knew where it came from, and we did not want to fire back into that direction without seeing what we're shooting at, because it was coming from a little village, so there were probably families there. But the insurgencies would fire from, churches, hospitals, neighborhoods. They didn't care.
What type of challenges did you face when you were doing training for the Iraq Army and police?
I didn't personally get involved in the training of the Iraqi police and army. There were other elements within our brigade that did that. But I heard that a lot of that was getting them to understand. It was a language barrier too. Even though we had interpreters, I think to get them to come around to the way that we wanted to train them, and they were so accustomed to the way that they had done it before. So I think that might have been a challenge for our guys that were doing that.
What did you do during the free time in Iraq?
Yeah, not a whole lot of that. Well, no, I did. I didn't have a whole lot of time, but we had a gym, so a lot of guys went to the gym. We had a MWR, which is Morale, Welfare, and Recreation area. So you had like a little library. People, donate books and things like that to put into the MWR sites. There were, a lot of guys were into playing video games, and they had Xboxes over there. Played cards quite a bit. In my first tour I had some buddies and we played cards. Yeah, because I even played in a tournament one time in 2003. Yeah.
How did you feel when your fellow service members regard the enemy combats?
Say that again?
How did you and your fellow service members regard the enemy combats?
Not a lot of respect for them as far as how they wanted to fight. IEDs, which you probably are familiar with, improvised explosive devices, are basically homemade mines that they would put in the roads. They employed suicide bombers. That's not the kind of tactics that the U.S. and our allies use. So it's something you have to get used to, dealing with that kind of tactics, and you have to adapt and know how to deal with that kind of thing. That was after so many casualties of IEDs, then that's when they developed the armored Humvees and the MRAPs to combat that. So you have to adapt.
How did it feel to emotionally that a suicide bomber could attack you at any moment?
That was something that we always were wary of and concerned. A friend of mine actually was killed by a suicide bomber. That was a bad day. We were supposed to be going to do 2 different locations. He went to the one up north. I went to the one down south. I came back. He did not. With not knowing who was the enemy and who was your friends, you couldn't distinguish between the bad guys and the good guys. And the way that they dressed with the robes and stuff, you don't know if they're a little overweight or they've got a suicide vest on underneath. So you had to be very on your toes and look for what could be out there and what could be a threat.
How did you honor the people that died and the friends that died in action?
We had memorials at our base. There's a whole process that has to be followed whenever a casualty occurs like that. We go down on what they call media blackout. No more Facebook, no more calling home. We can't even get back out of our base to make any kind of contact until the Army or the Department of Defense goes through the proper channels to notify the next of kin back home. But in the meantime, we quickly start to schedule and have some sort of service to remember those that we've lost. And unfortunately, we had 2 in country that I attended. So we lost several in 2009. And then I know there was one that passed away when she was back in the States. It was not combat related, but still. It just so happened she was home. But yeah, memorials, ceremonies.
How do you think the people that shot from the populated places knew that you wouldn't shoot back?
I think they knew exactly what they were doing. They know that our rules of engagement specifically prohibit firing into populated areas unless you've got a clear sight and you know exactly what you're shooting, because we try to minimize collateral damage as much as possible, especially when you're trying to win over the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people and let them know that we're there to help them. And if we're shooting in their house or their neighborhood, it's not going to work.
Did you have a K-9 unit to make sure that you didn't step on mines that were homemade?
No, we did not. They may have had some in some of the other military police units, but I wasn't part of that.
What do you remember most about returning home after deployments?
Coming back home, it takes a little bit of an adjustment to get back. The same way that going over there, you have a culture shock of just how people live and things are different. Coming back home, it's not as much a shock as it takes time to sort of readjust. You have to get back used to being around people, trusting people. You're not on guard so much, so it just takes a little while to get used to it.
How did your experience as you enlisted members influence your service as an officer?
Good question. The distinguished traits and the jobs and responsibilities of the non-commissioned officer and the officers are very different, but at the same time there's a lot of things that are the same. Leadership. NCOs have leadership, officers have leadership too, but it's a different kind. You oversee more things, and you think of big picture versus small picture. An officer, especially the higher rank you get, they oversee big areas, big budgets, big groups of people, where the non-commissioned officer is more of your first line supervisors. They are the one-on-one with the soldiers. They take care of the soldiers specifically. officers sort of oversee it. But the influence between the two, they work together. They have to work together if they're going to be successful. I remember I was fortunate that I was an NCO before I became an officer. So I've basically been on both sides of the fence. When I first got my commission in my first unit, I was a young lieutenant, but I already had 6 years of service behind me. My NCO did not know that when he first met me, and he thought he, could sort of work me a little bit, not because he didn't think I was experienced, but very quickly he found out, and we got a really good relationship after we had sort of come together and worked out how we were going to do this as a team.
Because you were enlisted first, did the troops respect you more than other officers who did not have enlisted experience?
I think so. Myself, I had a lot more respect for officers that were prior enlisted, even before I became one. And I know that I had enlisted members that later on found out that I was prior enlisted. There was sort of like a aha moment. They're like, oh, now I know why you're good at this, or they liked what I had done. I may not have had all of them that liked me, but I know some made the comment that they appreciated that I came from the NCO ranks.
In your opinion, what does it mean to serve honorably?
To serve honorably, it means to do your best, try your best, keep faith with your duties and responsibilities. Don't give up. You've got to persevere. Thanks. Through all kinds of conflict and stay true to your word and your integrity. You've got to, if you want to serve your country, then do it. Don't go back on your vow.
Do you think any of the enemies were honorable?
I don't know. There may have been some. Every conflict has two sides. Each side thinks that they're in the right and they're justified in what they do. The types of people that we were going up against in the Iraqi war, they think that they are justified in what they do and how they do it. They think that in their view and their religion that sacrificing themselves to kill innocents is okay and the right thing to do. We have different perspectives ourselves. So do they have honor? They think they do. I don't think so.
What advice would you give to anyone thinking about joining the military?
Think hard about it. It's not for everyone. It can be very rewarding. It can be something to get you on the right path if you're not already looking at the right path. I've got plenty of friends who went into the military and it wasn't the career for them. It was a good experience for them, but maybe they didn't want to do it the whole time like I did. That's okay. My plan was 4 years and get out. I was going to get out and go to college. And 4 years turned into 6 years. 6 years turned into 32. So you just never know. I could tell people, and especially my children, always have a plan, 5-year plan, 10-year plan. If you're going to write down this plan, write it in pencil with an eraser, because things change. You may have a plan to go this way, but you may end up back here before you get back up here. You know what I'm saying? You want to get a degree? Great, you should. Everybody should get a college degree. But it may not be a straight line to get to that degree. It took me a while to get my education. But after years and years, I didn't go straight 4-year college and got my degree. It took me a while. But after working hard and going at night, I ended up with a master's. And I think everybody has that capability of doing it.
Would you let your children join the service?
Yes, I would. I have a son who was considering it. He decided he wanted to do something different, and he still, even now, he's 25, and he still is, just mentioned it last week actually, if he might. I don't think he will, but I would encourage him if he wants to. I would support him. And then my other daughters, it's not that I wouldn't, support them if they wanted to go. I just don't see it happening, not for them.
Are there any other stories, experiences, or thoughts you would like to share with us today?
Not that I can think of. I'll let you know if I think of something else.
Thank you for taking your time to talk with us today.
You're welcome.